Ladies and gentlemen of the Red Pill Philosophy audience, sit back, kick back, and pop that red pill, which you will be taking right now via video and or audio channels of sensory perception. Sometimes you can't ingest the red pill through your stomach, but you know what the next best thing is? A dosage of the red pill through your fucking ears. Okay, enough of that. Quick note before we get this conversation started. The following conversation, the following talk, discussion, podcast, whatever the hell you want to call it, is available. Audio only format, so you can listen to it on the go on your smartphone using the free Red Pill Philosophy app. The link is in the info section below. Download the app onto your smartphone. You can listen to this entire conversation on the go, stuck in traffic, working out, away from your computer, wherever the fuck you're at, going for a walk, as I am right now. Download the free app. Bam, bitches. So, today's discussion, the rabbit hole that we shall be diving deep down into, is something that I discovered actually this morning in doing some initial research, which was that it turns out that the fathers, the founders, the people who started off quantum mechanics in the early 20th century, a lot of them, after stumbling upon the implications of quantum mechanics and their experiments, their scientific experiments, they became Buddhists, they became Hinduists, or they certainly began to appreciate and adopt many mystical, Hinduish, kind of Buddhist spiritual teachings, because the implications of quantum mechanics jive so closely and so well with many teachings from Buddhism and Hinduism, which are often regarded, as mystical. But ironically, paradoxically seemingly, quantum mechanics itself, the implications of it seem mystical. They go against all scientific materialist, laws and assumptions about reality. Quantum superposition. Two particles existing in two different states simultaneously. No, one particle existing in two separate states simultaneously. That's quantum superposition. Quantum entanglement. What Albert Einstein couldn't help but refer to as spooky action at a distance. Quantum entanglement. You affect one particle on the other side of the universe, and instantaneously that affects another particle on the direct opposite side of the universe. What's happening here? It seems to be that there's some kind of connection between particles at opposite ends of the frickin' universe, right? So that on its own is pretty bizarre. It's freaky. Spooky action at a distance. Of course, it's not actually spooky action. It's not actually paradoxical. It's not actually contradictory. It's not actually flawed. These implications of quantum mechanics, these things known as quantum entanglement. They're not actually spooky. They're not actually contradictory. They're not actually flawed. They're only contradictory, spooky, and flawed if you're coming from a mainstream materialist scientific view of the world. Which states, I can't believe I'm walking around barefoot through the streets of Miami, talking to myself. You could imagine that might provoke concerns and curiosity in the minds of the good citizens of this city, but whatever. Anyways, technically I'm talking to the audience, not talking to myself, but I'm sure I look like a psycho. Oh well. I look like a psycho only from others' presuppositions, pre-biases about how people should look like, which is exactly what Einstein failed to do. That's exactly what Einstein did. He looked at the implications of quantum physics from his own pre-bias, his own presumptions about how the world should be, i.e., that matter is fundamental to reality, that there is an objective realm of reality that is the standard and arbiter of all truth. And so he couldn't help but call quantum entanglement spooky action at a distance. He couldn't help. Of course, he presumed that there must be some kind of flaw in quantum mechanics. And on that presumption, he tried, to the end of his days, to figure it out. How can I finally bridge this gap between general relativity physics and quantum mechanics? because that was a big deal, the mid-20th century. And to this day, there was a divide where general relativity, Einsteinian physics, wasn't merging smoothly with quantum physics. There was some kind of a divide, an impenetrable divide, where the math of quantum mechanics and the math of Einsteinian physics would not merge consistently. There was an error somewhere. Einstein took the implications of quantum mechanics and said, quantum mechanics must be flawed, and he tried to the end of his days to no avail to solve that riddle, that error, and come up with his own theory of everything that explained the entire cosmos from his mainstream materialist, what some call realism. That's what he was. He was a realist. Realism, which is a very ironic word. How could you claim, monopoly over realism? Realism should be what's actually true, if there's such a thing as actually true. But anyways, so, it's mind-blowing. It's mind-blowing because what you realize is that if you go back and you read, literally, how about this? Schrodinger. You ever heard of Schrodinger's cat? Schrodinger, I think his name was Erwin Schrodinger? Erwin Schrodinger literally wrote a book called My View of the World. And literally, he says that once he understood the implications of quantum physics, which, by the way, the experiments in quantum physics have been redone in so many varieties, so many times, over and over again, because mainstream materialist science is trying to disprove it, debunk it. How do we rationally, from our mainstream materialist view of the world, explain this thing that we call the double slit experiment? So they've redone the double slit experiment so many times that they've done it more times than they would do any other scientific experiment. The mainstream materialist science have redone the double slit experiment so many times in an effort to debunk it, to debunk its implications, because they're afraid of what it might say about their worldview. And what's their worldview for any new listeners? Their worldview is quite simply that matter, the physical world, is fundamental to reality, that it exists objectively and independently outside conscious observers like you or me. And of course, that viewpoint it has its own inherent contradictions, which mainstream science doesn't seem to really care about. They just kind of ignore it and ask you to just, it's like Terence McKenna once said a very long time ago. He said that science, modern mainstream materialist science, is based on the principle of give us one free miracle and we'll explain the rest, which is incredibly funny when you think about that, because what he means was that modern mainstream materialist science is based on the miracle, the leap of faith, that all the matter in the universe literally came from nothing, right? So all the matter in the universe came from nothing, which by default is a paradox and a contradiction. And if you don't really understand that, well, check out my past videos on this. If you go to my playlist titled Consciousness, Quantum Physics, and Other Mind Fucks, that playlist includes all the debunking of modern mainstream materialism, the Big Bang, and all that shit. So yeah, give us one free miracle and we'll explain the rest. That's what modern mainstream materialist science is based on, which is just petty and so shallow and obvious. I don't know how people don't question it. Then again, most people learning it are the poor, ignorant, brainwashed students in school who are learning out of their science textbooks, and they don't really give a shit, so they're not really going to ask these simple fucking questions. Shit, I remember back when I was in high school being taught the Big Bang, I'm like, hey, well, where did all the shit that caused the Big Bang come from? Don't ask that question, shithead. That makes you a mystic. That makes you a weirdo. You're not scientific if you don't assume that physical matter is independent and objective and exists fundamental to our reality. Fucking nonsense. So, we go back to the quantum physicists of the 20th century, and they're peering with microscopes into the very fundamental fabric of the cosmos, of reality. And what happens? To their shock, it turns out, if you perform the double slit experiment over and over again, it turns fucking out that the observer consciousness, the very fact that somebody is watching the experiment, is affecting it, is affecting the outcome. You cannot separate. This is what realism tries to do. This is what modern mainstream materialist science tries to do. It tries to exclusively separate. It tries to exclusively separate the objective world of matter and physical particles from subjective conscious experience. That's what modern mainstream materialist science and the realism view of reality is trying to do. Purely 100% separate them, saying, it's also known as separability, separate them, claim that there is no connection between the subjective and the objective, that the physical world exists no matter what a conscious observer thinks about it. Even though, ironically, technically, scientists won't deny that the consciousness of a person thinking in control of a body, that body, your body, can shape the physical world. I mean, isn't that a form of consciousness affecting the physical world? Isn't your consciousness in your mind capable of manipulating your body to move and do things, and then using that body to build a house in the physical world? Isn't that an example of consciousness affecting the physical world? Why assume that the physical body, I mean, consciousness is animating the physical body, your thoughts, things we can't quantify, things that seem beyond the realm of matter. Of course, the mainstream, the realists will say that, well, quite simply, consciousness and thoughts are just a spooky little byproduct of physical particles, neurochemical associations in the brain. Which, again, that's a surface level question. That's irrelevant. I don't really even have to consider that question until the mainstream materialist science, the realists, can answer the fundamental questions of the paradox of the Big Bang Theory and how matter, everything in the universe came from nothing. Answer me that question and we'll talk. It's interesting, though, this idea that all matter came from nothing, if anything, is proof of what I'm trying to imply here. Again, I admit that I may be wrong, no doubt, but I have to ask these questions intuitively. I think I'm onto something. Not me, not I'm onto something, but I've read a lot of experts, a lot of the scientists, a lot of the pioneers throughout history, and the things that they say, quantum mechanics, quantum physics, it's pretty clear that something's going on in the universe that our mainstream materialist view of reality, for the most part, is denying. So, in the silence, from nothingness comes somethingness. This is why we should embrace silence, emptiness, the void. Even mainstream materialist science will admit this. From the void sprouts everything. From nothingness comes something, as science wants us to believe. Which, interestingly, wouldn't necessarily be a paradox. It's not really a contradiction, in my opinion, that all of matter comes from this thing we call nothingness. If anything, nothingness, this ether of non-formity, this ether is the source of what we think is physical, solid matter and the world around us. It's only a contradiction if you're coming from the mainstream materialist science view, which says everything must have a causal explanation. In a mechanistic material world, everything must have a causal explanation. Well, if that's true, then you can never actually have an origin to the universe. I've said this a million times. I hate to repeat it, but honestly, these are advanced topics, and if you're a new listener and you don't really know what I'm talking about, and I don't recover these ideas, you're going to be fucking lost. So, I'll repeat it in very short nature. If you've heard it before, well, at least your memory and your understanding of it will improve. But anyways, yeah, just mainstream materialist science says everything must have a cause in this mechanistic world of rational explanations. Rational in and of itself is a presupposition of tautological rule sets. Rational is something which can be explained through causality. And of course, then we think that rational is the only thing that can exist. When explaining things through causality is not the be-all, end-all of reality. Sorry, but it seems that reality is much more than just 2 + 2 = 5. This fucking water bottle I dropped out of my hand, fell to the floor because gravity pulled it. There's a grander paradigm encapsulating all these little nearsighted, short-sighted little occurrences that is beyond causality. And so going back, Werner Heisenberg, Erwin Schrödinger, these guys, many of them, through their experimentation with quantum mechanics, actually began to believe in various Buddhist and Hindu philosophies, and they even directly integrated them into each other. Einstein, the realist, the materialist, was angry at some of the quantum physicists who were how dare they, consider to combine certain spiritual ideas with science and quantum mechanics. Einstein was offended. He thought that the quantum physicists who were daring combine the implications of quantum mechanics with spiritual teachings from the East, he condemned them. He said that they were being unscientific, that they were taking part in pseudoscience. Well, not really pseudoscience. Pseudoscience is only really pseudoscience if you have a strict definition of what science is. If, on the other hand, science is the pursuit of actual, ultimate, true truth, then science will encompass the implications of quantum physics, which are 100% entirely within the laws of possibility and acceptance. 100 within the laws of possibility and acceptance. What the fucking goddamn, what the fuck is that, man? God, sorry. It's like a dead iguana, fucking creepy looking shit. Life is freaky, man. Life is fucking freaky. Just walking down the sidewalk and there's like a dead iguana, fucking mostly rotten, spinal cord just shining in the fucking sunlight. It's just a freaky world we live in, man. A freaky fucking world. So Einstein, this freaking bitter, dogmatic asshole, this Einstein guy, he did not like that quantum physics and quantum physicists who were peering deeply into the fundamental origins and root of reality were literally coming to scientific experimental conclusions that implied a spiritual nature in reality. Implied a spiritual nature to reality. Man, oh man, Einstein didn't like it. And you know what? He died a miserable, bitter man, I'm sure. I've heard that historical accounts say that he died alone in his home, desperately scrambling before death to figure out an explanation to all reality, a theory of everything, he calls it. It's a common term nowadays. A theory of everything that explained the entire universe, but only coming from his realist, materialist view of the world, his materialist belief system. And what did he get him? Well, he didn't succeed, which that's not proof that he was on the wrong path, the fact that he didn't do it on time. But given all the other considerations, quantum physics, all the other implications I've been talking about thus far, it's obvious that he was in denial. He was in strict denial of the implications of quantum physics. And the implications of quantum physics are simple. And it ties into many Eastern traditions, which is the most incredible part. Quantum physics basically says that subjective experience, your individuality, has a direct impact on the supposedly objective external world. And shit, motherfuckers, I would say there isn't even an objective world, or at least using that word as a distinction between subject and an objective is flawed. What if the objective world is not actually objective? What if it's not actually this external kind of thing that through our own cognitive processes we separate by frickin' light years and millions of miles? Because think about that for a second. When you believe in a mainstream materialist view of reality, you naturally assume that it's separate from you. And separate by, it's inherent in the idea of the objective world. When you see matter and you put your hand up to the computer and you touch the computer, you really believe you're touching something outside of you. And the moment you believe it's outside of you and external from you, it creates this gulf, this gap, this perceptual gap, this gap in perception, how you view things, that's 1,000,000 miles wide. Now, it may not feel like that, right? You're touching your computer right now, touching the laptop, or maybe you're touching the smartphone because you downloaded the free Red Pill Philosophy app and you're listening to it on the go on your smartphone. Quick plug there in the middle of my cosmic explanations. When you touch it, if you believe that you're separate from the external world, you're coming from the modern mainstream materialist scientific view of the world, compared to somebody who doesn't think they're actually separate from the world, somebody who might be coming from a quantum physics view, that we are literally intermingled by a vast ether web, which is what quantum physics implies with the double slit experiment, the quantum entanglement, quantum superposition. All of these factors imply some interconnectivity on a grand universal cosmic scale. Compared to somebody who's coming from a perception of mind that you are integrated with reality, not separate from it, somebody else, like maybe you, for example, who believes the mainstream materialist view that we're separate from the external world, it's like 1,000,000 mile difference. It's like 1,000,000 miles of a difference in your perception when you touch that laptop. If you touch a laptop and you believe that you're somehow like separate from the external world, it's going to feel like 1,000,000 miles away, compared to if you believe you're directly in reality, swimming in the sea of reality, intermingled in the sea of reality. A huge difference. That's one reason why I think that, science versus religion is no different than Democrat versus Republican. It's a false matchup between what is on the surface, they appear different, but fundamentally they're still arguing the same thing. It's funny, isn't it? Physical matter is the God of science, whereas Jesus is the God of religion. But what's identical, what's similar in both mainstream, what's similar in terms of the God of science and the God of religion, is that both of them are objective external standards of truth. Objective external standards of truth and value and reality. With the God of science, ultimate truth is in the physical world. The God of science is physical matter. Physical matter is what we can measure. It's what we determine all truth from. The laws of physics, the laws of nature. All of these external, ultimate standards from which truth and value stem from. With God, same fucking thing. It's the same damn thing with a God of religion. The God of religion, it's an external standard and arbitration measurement of truth. Key distinction. They're different on the surface, but fundamentally they're the same. And that's why I think pitting religion off against science versus religion, as if they're different, is like science, is like Democrat versus Republican. The same damn thing. Insignificant distractions. Because fundamentally, the Republicans and Democrats are no different. The Republicans and Democrats are just calling from their own kind of government dependency. And religion versus science is calling for its own kind of external dependency on truth. And it's funny, the corollary is there. Because both politics and science versus religion, both of them are asking you to outsource your personal importance, your personal sense of the world, your personal responsibility to an external source. With politics, it's government. With religion versus science, it's the God of physical matter or the God of the Bible, the Quran, etc., the Old Testament, etc. And so what you realize is that the real distinction, the real fundamental distinction is objective versus subjective. Objective versus subjective. Ladies and gentlemen, viewers, audience members of the Red Pill Philosophy Experience. That really is the key distinction, and that actually ties into something else I've been thinking about lately. I've been talking a lot lately about competition and how I think competition is like a disease. It's a mental disorder. The desire to compete against others, especially on an emotional level, competing against others for emotional reasons, like you want to be better because you want to, like your ego, you want to have more money than your friend so you feel superior to him, because in the face of equality you feel inferior. If you were just self-loving by default along with your friends and everybody else in the world, for some reason, for some people, equality equals inferiority. Equality is basically, it causes them to feel inferior. And so they strive to get more money, add more zeros to their bank account, to own a bigger house, to, date a woman who's got better anti-gravity tits than his friends, and on and on and on. The petty little competition. Competition, I would say, is a mental disorder. And it's not surprising to me that the psychiatry industry, which is basically an evil industry designed to destroy people's consciousness, really. The psychiatry industry hasn't included in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, the DSM, the big psychiatrist Bible. They haven't included that yet. They haven't included competition as a mental disorder yet. But they'll include boredom, which is basically ADHD. They'll include that, won't they? Anything that threatens the system of domination and power, they will not fucking support. Competition is a mental disorder. And so the question isn't, people talk about the free market. They say, oh, the free market, voluntary interactions, individual rights, property rights, and competition is allowed. You don't have to fucking look. For me, the distinction when it comes to a marketplace, when it comes to existing in reality along with other people on this planet in these things we call countries, the distinction for me isn't, oh, should we have a planned economy or should we have a free market economy? Should we have a socialist economy? Should we have a communist economy? That's more surface level distractions, like Democrat versus Republican, mainstream materialist science versus religion. More surface level distractions cause by not thinking enough about what we claim to support. The real distinction when it comes to an economy is transcending that whole paradigm of an economy and going deeper to the real fucking distinction, which is, ladies and gentlemen, which is, do you choose to holistically work together with others and cooperate, or do you choose to divisively compete and destroy others? It's really holism versus separatism. Holism is like, holistic, the whole thing, all encompassing. Holism is if you were to, go about your day every day considering how can I make things better for everything in reality. Whereas separatism is separation. It's I'm separate from you, and because of that, I should compete to acquire more goods, more stuff, even if it's at your expense. Holism versus separatism. Which is, interestingly enough, that fundamental point actually kind of relates to the objective versus the subjective, which is what I was talking about earlier. So you have all these kinds of things. You have all these concepts, and I guess I'll go back to the fundamental point I was talking about at the start, which was how, quantum physicists Heisenberg, Erwin Schrödinger, all these individuals, a lot of them, not all quantum physicists, but a lot of them, as they study quantum physics, as they perform the experiments, they were compelled to scratch their heads and go, man, the implications of the experiments sound a whole lot like those Eastern spiritual traditions that freaking monks have been, writing about for thousands of years before we ever had fucking, the microscopic technology to analyze the fundamental physical particles in reality. How the fuck did Buddha, thousands of years ago, wherever the fuck he was alive, how the fuck did he and other spiritual teachers throughout the world realize these truths, right? How did they realize these truths without microscopes, without measurements, without an understanding of how fundamental particles work, without an understanding that fundamental particles existed at all? How did they do it? Well, ladies and gentlemen, that goes back to another point that I've made before. Genius can't be taught in a classroom. Go watch that video on my channel. Crucial fucking learning. Genius can't be taught in a classroom. No lesson ever taught in a school textbook ever originated in a school textbook. It originates in the mind of a person and then is written down in textbooks for later generations to memorize and regurgitate for a fucking grade so they can get a diploma, so they can go to college and get a college degree, so they can get a stupid job that arbitrarily says you got to learn a bunch of shit in school that you'll never use on the job, so you can finally get your money to buy all the bullshit shit you saw on TV that told you it was going to make you happy, the big screen TV, the escape to the Bahamas vacation. So then you can finally retire and die, but not before you've already had 3 more children who you're indoctrinating into the same cycle system you just went through. By the way, that's a play on the word. Not only is a cycle system as in cyclical, it's also a psycho as in psychopath. The cycle system. There's a play on words for you. Put your kids in the public school system, they grow up to be the same fucking process over and over again, repeats because they have kids, and then they have kids, and on and on and on, in this nice cycle that keeps what? It keeps a giant, competitive-based, separatist-based machine running. Money-making machine running for corporate overlords who are the greatest, most diseased victims of this disease, this mental disorder known as competition. It's, it seems to stem, where does this mental disorder of competition come from? And by the way, this is a huge distinction that people have to make. This is a huge distinction that people have to make. Because this idea that we're separate from others, which is rooted in realism, It's rooted in what Einstein believed. It's rooted in mainstream materialist science. This idea that we are separate from others, along with things like social Darwinism, the survival of the fittest mentality, spearheaded by Mr. Darwin. These viewpoints encourage the lifestyles and the society we live in today. The society of destruction, the society of petty competition, the society of fear-based actions and intentions, the society of separatism, where we think we're separate from others and thus we compete against each other to accomplish goals at the expense of others. It's a joke. But to the contrary, quantum mechanics, quantum physics tells us the exact opposite and actually encourages us to act the exact opposite. The opposite of separatism is holism, holistic, reawakening to the fact that you are a part of an entire system and that your self-interest is actually the self-interest of everybody else. And the self-interest of everybody else is actually your self-interest. And so what is the outcome? Well, the outcome is huge. Because imagine a difference in a world between people who live through the separatist view, which is sustained by the mainstream materialist science, which is sustained by things like, Darwinistic views, survival of the fittest, etc. All of these ideas perpetuate this destructive system. And what's the opposite? Well, holism. Call it whatever the hell you want. People tend to get wrapped up in the labels they use to describe things. And then they become more obsessed with defending a label instead of defending the ideas that specifically define that label. Hilarious, man, I'll tell you. Hilarious how this all works. So these are all crucial distinctions. Crucial distinctions that have to be made. But the question is, who makes them? Are they actually accurate? Is it possible that they're flawed? And on, and on, and on. As y'all know. As y'all very well know. Give me a quick sip of water here. I would say you've just been prescribed at least 2.5, probably 3 doses of red pill. 3 red pills was today's prescription, but we're not done. We're probably going to go in for a fourth red pill. Overdose is always a possibility, but when you overdose on red pills, all that happens is you snap out of your trance, you become a better person. Get a little hydration here. If you guys weren't aware, this podcast is being spoken, conjured, and recorded while I'm walking barefoot through the streets of Miami. It's around, it's about 2 p.m. Is that what time it is right now? It's about 1 p.m. right now. Busy as fuck. Everyone's out on lunch. Cars everywhere. Driving here, driving there. Walking by a Burger King right now. The evil Satan of fast food. I think McDonald's is actually the great Satan of fast food. Because you know what? Burger King still kind of has that dingy look. Like they're still trying to get their shit together. But McDonald's has like scientifically mastered everything. They've scientifically mastered it. Their restaurants are usually cleaner, more modernized and polished. I think they work a lot of times with government. McDonald's is truly the great Satan. At least the great Satan of fast food anyways. So again, I was reading, some guy actually did a great job breaking down the history of, quantum mechanics and how quantum mechanics and how a lot of the quantum physicists who discovered and studied these ideas, they actually became, I wouldn't say they became Hindus, I wouldn't say they became Buddhists per se, but they saw the correlations between the implications of quantum physics and how that ties into a lot of the Hindu teachings rooted in spirituality. Things like we're all one. Oneness is a big component. Also referred to as monism, monism, monism. It's basically this idea that we're all one. And actually, the double slit experiment, quantum entanglement, and quantum superposition implies just that. It implies this idea of holism, this idea that we're all one, we're all interconnected somehow, that you're not separate from the objective physical world. Turns out the objective physical world isn't even objective. Objective applies separate, independent from. It ain't. It's interconnected. It's woven and sewn together like a freaking fabric, like your grandmother sewing together a new patch on your shirt, interwoven. And the cosmic ether matrix of the universe. So I believe that we're all suffering greatly from this separatist view of the world. It encourages more and more separation. When you believe you're separate, you believe that you can somehow benefit at others' expense, which to the contrary, I would say that when you benefit at someone else's expense, it's actually hurting you. You may not know it, you may not see it in this superficial, narrow view of reality, but on a grander scale, it's all there. On a grander scale, it's all fucking there. So, it's funny, could it be argued that quantum mechanics is the science of Buddhism? Could it be said that quantum mechanics is the science of spirituality? In many ways, it is. In many ways, what quantum physics did was it took the scientific method and applied it to such an extreme, to the most fundamental level of reality and particles and physics and matter. And it turned out that if you look deep enough into the very fabric of the cosmos, peering through your little microscope, you're going to see yourself staring back at you. Which isn't that the ultimate implication of the double slit experiment? The observer affecting reality? When you perform the double slit experiment and the fact that you're observing changes the outcome, that's telling you that what you're observing that you think is outside of you, these physical particles that you think are outside of you, what you're observing is actually of you. It's in you. You are what you're looking at. Fucking mind-blowing shit. Fucking mind-blowing shit, man. What you're looking at is you. Now, I'm looking around right now as I walk, and that different view is scary in a beautiful way. I'm looking at the world now, but I'm looking at it as if it's not out there, but it's of me. It's a part of me. And literally, I feel different. Everything looks different. Everything feels different. It's a different interpretation of the exact same things. It's incredible. It's beautiful. It's incredible and it's beautiful. Incredible and beautiful, ladies and gentlemen. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, incredible and beautiful. So, your freaking double slit experiment, looking into the fabric of the cosmos, fucking particles react depending on if you're looking at it or not. Bam! You're looking through the microscope, you thought you were looking at some external little particles outside of you. No, bro, you were looking at yourself. That's the grand implication of quantum physics. Holism. Mainstream materialist science, also known as realism, is the science, if it could even be called that, of separatism, of division. And of course, that's the grand distinction, because it goes back to what I was saying earlier. There's a difference between a separatist view of the world and a holistic interpretation. Where, by the way, that's funny. The separatist view of reality encourages divisiveness, separation, more destruction, and more differential advantage, which is what they typically refer to it as. Which I find just incredible. Find it just incredible. So yeah, I find myself walking sometimes, I fucking lose track, and next thing you know, I'm 30 minutes away from home barefoot. I gotta walk back now. It's fun though, it's fucking nice. Hoping to do a video today. School equals prison pop quiz. I got angry and I punched my laptop's monitor. Fucking thing shattered, so I don't have my computer. And my computer is my entire fucking life. So I don't know what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna have to find some alternative way to upload content for a week or so as I get the shit back together. Alright, I'm gonna take a seat real quick. Because it's hot. And as conditioned as my bare feet are to pavement, they're hurting a little bit. I found a little bit of shade here. I'm actually in a Kmart parking lot. And that's right, people. Holism, integration, connectivity, oneness, as the Indian traditional teachings refer to it as. And I don't know. It's always difficult. See, look, there's a bug on my arm, and he's a fucking freaky looking guy. If I flick it off, does that make me a separatist? Does that mean that I'm looking at the world from a separatist viewpoint? I don't know. I just don't know. Bear with me in these moments of silence. Again, silence is not awkward, and in many ways, silence is golden. It's the nothingness. It's the void. The void of nothingness is the oneness. Actually, that's what I think. And if the void of nothingness is everything, then that's where everything comes from. So you have to embrace the silence. You can't shut it out. You can't try to ignore it. The silence is crucial in coming up with ideas and really just flowing with life. Sometimes silence is required, but for some reason, some people think silence is awkward. It's awkward. It's weird. You gotta avoid it. You gotta fill the silence in with something. Fuck that. Embrace the silence. It's a beautiful fucking thing. Now, of course, that doesn't mean that the silence is always there. It doesn't mean that talking is somehow evil. It just means that every now and again, when silence comes up and it feels right, let it happen. Just let it happen. So I guess that's just about all I wanted to say today, really, on this podcast, talk, discussion, whatever the hell you want to call it. Quantum physicists, a lot of them, Heisenberg, Schrodinger, many others, literally, upon observation of these experimental results in quantum physics, they were thinking, holy crap, this is like right out of Buddhist, Hindu spiritual teachings. Right out of it. And they, of course, when they fucking realized this shit, they were like, what the fuck? Because you could imagine, you're a scientist, you're coming from what is actually, historically speaking, religion and science were not always as separate as they are today. Today, science almost has like a monopoly on not being spiritual, not having any kind of mystical explanations for reality. Back then, a lot of the quantum physics, a lot of physicists, a lot of the scientists back then, start of the 20th century, they actually had a lot of them had religious viewpoints. It was, what was the other prominent, Pauli, I think his name was? He was a freaking Christian. A lot of these guys had spiritual views. But at some point in history, I think it was around after World War II, science became almost exclusively tied into the religion of materialism, because it's nothing more than a religion. This belief in the physical world as being primary is literally nothing more than a religion, full of leaps of faith and contradictions. So they were just like, man, this reminds me of all the spiritual teachings. Oneness, we're all one, the ether, connectivity. And it's a different way to look at the world, because I honestly have lived my whole life looking at life the other way. But man, what if you just look at it all integrated? Shift that mind state from, I don't know where you guys are listening. I don't know where you're at right now. Maybe you're in a car, maybe you're at home, maybe you're out walking or something. I don't know what the fuck you're doing on a bus. But, just look around you. I don't know what viewpoint you're coming from, but my whole life I came from the viewpoint that the physical world is outside of me and separate. But instead, kind of adopt this different point where literally everything around you, what you feel, what you're sitting on, what you're touching, the wind across your skin, and even what you're looking at, the trees, the cars passing by, outside your window, the room you're in, whatever it is, just imagine for a moment that maybe instead of that being far away, distant, and outside of you, that it's literally a part of you. It's literally of you. You are it. Imagine for a moment what that might be like. What it's like to come into that epiphany. It's a different way of living. Literally, from the ground up, it's a different way of living. A different way of being, a different way of living, a different way of everything. Thinking, habits, choices, it all changes. It all changes. You want change? Don't vote for fucking Obama. Change yourself from within, have a quantum leap. Then we could talk about change. All right, ladies and gentlemen, thanks a lot for tuning in to the Red Pill Philosophy podcast, talk, whatever the fuck you want to call it. This is your home. I don't even want to call it that. I'm done with that shit. But if you guys want dosages of the red pill, sometimes you don't have to actually ingest it via the mouth. You can actually ingest red pills through your ears by listening, or through your eyes by watching Red Pill Philosophy content. Thank you so much for tuning in, guys. Take care. Be safe. Leave your comments below. Am I on crack, or am I onto something? We'll talk about it. Peace.